Okay, welcome to the program. This is the Otherppl Show, a weekly podcast featuring in-depth conversations with today's leading writers. It's a books and culture show, and I'm Brad Listi. This is my podcast. It's great to have you here, and I appreciate you tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, and you can follow me on Instagram and Blue Sky. I have a very fascinating conversation to share with you today. I'm going to be talking with Laura K. Field. She has a new book out called Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right. It is available from Princeton University Press. This is a book that is about the radicalization of the conservative intellectual world that accompanied the rise of Donald Trump and his era in power in American politics. Laura Field has herself spent time in conservative intellectual circles as an academic, and her book is a chronicle of the rise of what is known as the New Right. It examines the network of influencers and intellectuals and academics who have created the ideological underpinnings of Trumpism in all of its incoherence and chaos. This is a fascinating book, feels necessary to me. It was helpful to me as I've tried to make sense of what's going on. I still don't fully grasp it. I don't think I ever will. I don't know. I don't even know if you can. I think my general attitude toward life and reality at this stage of my life and my reality is that I don't know what's going on. I know very little. I might not know anything. I don't fully know what I am or who I am or why I am or where we are. I don't understand other people, really. I certainly don't understand politics or this country. I've been wrong so much over the past decade. I'm done predicting. I have no idea. I think pessimistically sometimes. I look around and I say to myself, well, I guess I'm just surrounded by a lot more crazy people than I ever thought possible. And then optimistically, I'll sometimes say to myself, you know what? People contain multitudes. Everything is in flux. Everything is fluid. Everything is ever changing. And there's a lot more that unites us than divides us as human beings. And we're going to come together eventually, or at least we're going to come together better than we have been. And then other times I'll say to myself, the algorithms are ruining us. We're addicted to our phones. If you're in a fragile mental state, which a lot of people are, and you get locked into a bad algorithm, that alone can cause a lot of trouble. And then you have these macro level issues, inequality, these financial crises, COVID, which I think did a real number on people in ways that we haven't even really fully grasped yet. Like psychologically, I feel like the pandemic really fucked with people and did a lot of damage. So there's a lot to process, I guess, is what I'm saying. And it all contains multitudes, right? Someone can be perfectly nice. You can be talking to your neighbor and they can seem perfectly nice. And then as the conversation continues, suddenly things can turn dark. They can start talking about politics in ways that you find abhorrent. So on the one hand, they're nice. On the other hand, they are abhorrent. You have to learn to live with complexity. You have to learn to live with people's flaws and cognitive dissonances. I mean, think of Thanksgiving, for example. We just had Thanksgiving. It's nice, right? Take the day off, eat some food, be lazy, day drink, all of that stuff. It's nice. Be thankful. Think about what you're grateful for. That's not bad, right? And yet, the holiday itself is rooted in genocide, which you also have to consider if you're somebody who wants to have a foot in reality. It just is, and that's abhorrent. So, nice and abhorrent. How do you handle that? How do you embrace the niceness while not also embracing the abhorrence? Can you have one without the other? I'm not entirely sure what to do. I think my view of reality in general is that I don't trust it. I think that beliefs are generally bad. I'm talking about religious beliefs, political beliefs. That stuff I'm not as interested in, maybe, as I used to be. Values, on the other hand, I feel more confident in. Things like, fairness or kindness and compassion. That stuff I have more certainty around. But particular beliefs, isms, all that stuff, I don't feel as good about it. So I hope you like this conversation with Laura Field is what I'm saying. I'm trying to get to the bottom of things. I'm trying to work my way through the fog. I had a good Thanksgiving for what it's worth. You go through the motions, right? I mean, I guess unless you don't. But in my family, we get together. Most families, I feel like, get together. Most people get together. And we had a nice day. I took a nap. That alone. I never take a nap. But my son was a little under the weather. And so I was like, you need to take a nap. And so then I went back there and I took a nap. Slept for like an hour. It was great. Today's episode is brought to you by Tin House, publisher of A Silent Treatment, a new memoir by Jeannie Vanasco. You might have heard about it on NPR's Weekend Edition. It was an NPR Book of the Day. It was named Harper's Bazaar Best Book of the Fall. The Minnesota Star-Tribune raves, quote, "Plenty of memoirs have been written about fraught relationships between mothers and daughters, but few are as disturbing and fascinating as Jeannie Vanasco's third memoir. The book's structure gives it power. Present tense makes it feel like we are reading over Vanasco's shoulder while she tries to figure out what she wants to write and how to say it. She brings a strong curiosity, a new way of looking at family and relationships, and a deep desire to understand rather than to judge." End quote. So A Silent Treatment is about the relationship between Jeannie and her mom and how her mom would give her the silent treatment. Like this was something that happened repeatedly. It could last as long as a few days or even a few months. And it became a feature of their relationship, which is fascinating. Again, the book is called A Silent Treatment, the new memoir by Jeannie Vanasco, available from Tin House. So I have a weekly email newsletter. I want to give it a quick plug. You can sign up over at bradlisti.substack.com. It's a great way to keep up with this podcast. I will let you know about the latest episodes each week. It'll arrive in your inbox. I also share in the newsletter a list of links to things that I have been reading and finding interesting. So if that sounds good, go sign up at bradlisti.substack.com. I also want to give a quick plug to my company, Deep Dive. I founded a company. I have a company. Deep Dive is a learning platform. It creates in-depth courses for people with curious minds. The first slate of courses available from Deep Dive are writing courses, because that is my wheelhouse. I am the host of each of these courses, and they unfold as dialogues. So the flagship course is called How to Write a Novel. It features more than 40 acclaimed contemporary authors and more than 50 hours of instruction. So it's a big, epic writing course, unlike any other. There are also courses on how to write autobiographical fiction that is taught by Hannah Pittard, and another course called How to Get the Reader on Board, taught by Steve Almond. And today, if you're listening in real time, like the day that this episode goes live on December 2nd, 2025. If you happen to be listening today, the Deep Dive Cyber Monday sale ends tonight at midnight Pacific time. And everything, all courses, all bundles are available for 50% off, 50, half off. You just enter the code CYBER2025 at checkout. You can send these courses as a gift on the day and time of your choosing. Just select Send as a Gift at checkout, and it'll be delivered to the recipient's inbox when you want to send it. So Christmas morning, for example, that can happen. Half off everything at www.deepdive.audio, and there will be more sales in the days ahead. There's going to be a holiday sale, but the Cyber Monday sale is the biggest of all sales. It ends tonight, December 2nd, at midnight Pacific time. One more time, the website is deepdive.audio. All right, so my guest once again is Laura K. Field. Her new book is called Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right, available from Princeton University Press. Laura Field is an associate with the Illiberalism Studies Program at George Washington University, and she is a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution. She has written about the New Right for The New Republic, Politico, the Bulwark, and other publications, and she holds a PhD in government from the University of Texas at Austin. a really fascinating talk, and I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Here she is, folks. This is Laura K. Field, and her new book, One More Time, is called Furious Minds.
I was raised, yes, in Edmonton, Alberta, which is in northern sort of Alberta, north of Calgary, east of the Rockies.
And I want to say in the book you referred to your parents as bourgeois hippies. Am I remembering that right?
I do. Yes, I do. My dad was sort of a real hippie. My mom's pretty, hung out with him.
So she was like, it was a little bit of balance.
A little more bourgeois, I guess, on her side. But they're all little bourgeois and kind of hippies. They were. My father passed away when I was quite young.
Okay. So you're raised in Canada, which I conceive of as a more liberal country than the United States, and it's like general political lean. Is that accurate?
Definitely. I think growing up, my family was certainly very liberal, and Edmonton's kind of liberal compared to Calgary and the rest of Alberta. It's the seat of government, and there's a big university there. There's. I mean, since Trump got elected and the pandemic, there's been a lot of interesting stuff kind of coming out of the woodwork in Canada too. So it's, the truckers and all of this stuff. There is a conservative movement in Alberta. The conservatives have been in charge on and off mainly for the last few decades.
So when did your political consciousness dawn? Do you remember, like, when you started getting interested in this stuff in a real way?
Well, in this stuff, that was more recent, but I've always been really politically motivated and animated by politics, sort of writ large. So when I went to undergraduate, I wanted to sort of save the world. I was in sort of what I thought of as pre-med, thinking I would be a doctor for like Doctors Without Borders. But I was also taking a political science degree at the same time. I was, just had a lot of interests. And so I ended up having to take a political theory course in political philosophy, which was partly just my love of literature that was animated by that, because these professors I had were just amazing, and they were quite conservative, but they were amazing lecturers and sort of opened up this world of books and the history of political philosophy starting in ancient Greece. So I sort of fell hard for that. Went to Texas for graduate school, and was still I was political in the sense that I loved arguing about politics and philosophy, but I wasn't sort of actually active in any way in politics. And I wasn't paying attention to movement politics or, the Republicans in any careful way. But I was surrounded by other students who were far more political than I was. And I was studying with these conservatives in Texas. And so a lot of the young students there were young men and very interested in politics. So I wouldn't say I was politically disinterested, but I was kind of apolitical and very sort of animated by politics intellectually, but not really in it. And so I was learning about politics, arguing with people about politics, but my dissertation was on Rousseau and Nietzsche, an autobiography. So it was there's a lot. I was sort of interested in a lot of different things, interested in literature, philosophy, and on the side, sort of arguing a lot about politics.
But like in a philosophical vein.
Yeah, in a philosophical vein and in a historical vein, right? Like writing about, when I was in Alberta, I was writing about Plato. When I was in grad school, I studied public law a little bit too. So I got to study comparative constitutionalism and the history of conservatism and the history of constitutionalism. And like I TA'd for constitutional law classes. So that was really good for me. And that sort of helped me understand politics in a more grounded way and sort of less philosophical way, which was interesting for me. So that sort of helped shape my political outlook. But I didn't sort of become engaged in politics in the way that I am now, or writing about it, especially for bigger audiences, until after Trump was elected.
Okay. So these professors that you had who really kind of lit you up and were outstanding lecturers, they were conservative, as you said, and they were talking about, is it Leo Strauss?
Yeah, they were sort of Straussians in Alberta. One of them was pretty conservative. I'd say Leon Craig, who's still alive, and Heidi Studer, who was, I wouldn't characterize her really as a conservative, but certainly compared to most academics, more open to conservative arguments than most people.
So I'm curious, like I I think earlier in your life, at least, would have characterized yourself as leaning conservative. Is that accurate?
Not really. I've never really called myself a conservative. I've never voted conservative. I've argued I think it's fair to say I was conservative curious and would argue a lot of conservative points with friends and things and sort of try to hash it out because I was sympathetic to some of those arguments. But no, I don't think I've ever described myself as a conservative, but I was in my 20s. I didn't think it really, I wasn't labeling myself and I wasn't voting much.
So the elements of it that you were sympathetic to would include what?
Well, the way they read the books, right? Like I was very into, and I am still pretty sympathetic to Straussian interpretations of these great books, which I could say a little bit more about, but to sort of taking the past seriously in this way, taking ideas seriously in the way that these professors did, as works of art and as works of a historical moment that was sort of trying to shape the future, many of which were very radical, multi-layered. And so there was just a depth to the way these professors taught and the way they understood history that I was really drawn to. In terms of the conservatism that we associate with conservatism in the United States, I wasn't drawn to much of that. I mean, when I was in undergraduate, the Iraq War was starting. I can remember sitting with these eclectic friends of mine who we were all caught up in political philosophy and watching the invasion of Iraq happen. And I was swept up in it sort of, but we were all watching it at the bar, right? And it was exciting and bizarre, but it wasn't like exciting as necessarily good. It was also kind of sickening and gross. And so we were arguing it out. I can remember arguing with my brother about whether this was a good thing or not, but I wasn't committed. I was arguing, right? I was trying to figure it out.
Yeah. There's you're a philosopher at heart, right? I mean, that's political philosophy, and this kind of approach to it is much different than like the activist approach or people who are on the ground and trying to kind of, I don't know, effectuate policy or... I
think so. I mean, I have never had a desire to be involved in any kind of administration, right? Or any kind of, especially in foreign affairs. I mean, the idea of making decisions that have anything to do with the lives of people overseas in places that have these histories that are so complicated. History is complicated everywhere, right? But I have never had a bone in my body that wanted to make decisions that had big impact on people. I'm sort of I wrote a book about some current events or current things happening, so I can't say I'm completely apolitical now. It's that, especially for an academic, to write a book like this is kind of bold, right? And so I can't hide behind that anymore. I mean, I feel okay doing it now in this narrow way, but when I was younger, I had no interest in it.
I think something that's interesting to me is the fact that there are philosophical underpinnings to MAGA. That is not something that's super evident in the behavior of Trump or in the behavior of the rank and file MAGA supporter. They don't seem to be Trump certainly doesn't seem to be a guy who's driven by some philosophy. Mm-hmm. He seems more transactional to me. And so it was very fascinating to read about the people who do have a really serious philosophical bearing or are driven by ideas, however abstract they might be, or illogical or whatever. Mm-hmm. That is part of the thing. And I guess I'm curious to know about your initial interaction with MAGA conservative, your initial engagement with it as a thinker, and maybe talk a little bit about how you felt about it and how your feelings evolved as you learned more.
So I did do this work. I finished my PhD and I graduated in 2011. And then I was already kind of disenchanted with that world that I had been in as an academic, even though they treated me well. There was no big blow up or anything, but I was sort of disenchanted. I was just not so into it as I had been when I was younger. And so I went on the job market, I started teaching, I had my kids. And then when Trump was elected, I was really, like a lot of other people, really startled by that, really surprised by it, and sort of sickened by it. And then over the course of that, first year when he was in office, I learned that this guy, Michael Anton, who was at the Claremont Institute, was a senior fellow at the Claremont Institute, which is a conservative think tank in California. I learned that he had written this essay called The Flight 93 Election, which, people may or may not have heard of by now, but by then not a lot of people had, but I saw friends on Facebook talking about it, and it was this sort of intellectualized defense of Trumpism and definition of Trumpism, and it was a really sort of unhinged apocalyptic essay. Like, if we don't elect Trump now, everything is lost. It's our last chance to save the republic. And so I was shocked by that too. I was like, oh, because I knew about the Claremont Institute. I had friends who had gone to summer things there about, they have these programs over the summer to go and learn to write, or different kinds of fellowships. And I had applied for grad school at the Claremont Graduate University. I had friends who had gone through there, and those things are separate, but it's sort of this little mini world of what we call West Coast Straussians, and I was studying with other Straussians. So I had heard of all these guys, and I thought, oh my God, I can't believe that they're at the sort of vanguard of this intellectual defense of Trumpism. So I was really interested in that and really put off by it, but captivated. And I was in this situation where I didn't have much loyalty to the conservatives, to the conservative intellectual world, even though I had kind of been in that world, or adjacent to the stuff that was happening with Trump. Like, the people I studied with weren't Trumpists. And I also wanted to pivot to public writing. I was kind of sick of academia. So I thought, well, this is interesting. And so I started watching much more closely. And then other people like Patrick Deneen, who's a Catholic intellectual and political theorist. Now he's at the University of Notre Dame, but I had known a little bit about him before. And then his book came out in 2018, which was this book called Why Liberalism Failed, which really I read, and I thought, this book is really bothered me too. And he was also part of this Trumpy movement. So these things started to happen where all of these people I kind of knew of were creating this new movement. So I started watching it really closely. I started writing about it. I think the first piece came out in 2019. And honestly, I didn't think I'd be writing about this after January 6th. I wrote some stuff about January 6th, and I thought, well, that's that. They're going to leave the stage. This is not going to be interesting. That did not go well for them. Presumably it's over, but I guess we all know now that didn't happen. And so what ended up happening is the movement it coalesced before January 6th. And then after January 6th, it just sort of kept growing and moving and consolidating. And so in 2022, I thought, well, maybe someone should write a book about this. And so then I started writing it, and they've just gained more and more power ever since. I think they've been really important in distinguishing the second administration from the first. I think that the book ended up sort of providing this explanation for something. It doesn't explain everything, and I don't think they're necessarily driving everything. I mean, Trump's still in charge. The movement's fracturing in all kinds of ways, but they're sort of one important piece of the puzzle and one important driver that it certainly helps us explain the difference between Trump 2.0 and Trump 1.0.
And when you say they, you're talking about the New Right.
I'm talking about the New Right, which I call them the MAGA New Right, because every new movement in sort of conservative intellectual spheres is called the New Right. So I had to distinguish it. This is the MAGA New Right. And by that, I mean the intellectual thinkers and activists behind Trumpism. But really, I mean, my book is about this sort of one slice of MAGA, which is the people with PhDs or who have otherwise sort of been involved in these crucial moments for intellectual life among conservatives and in the Republican Party. So it's like Buckley would have been in the old New Right. My guys have replaced Buckley and sort of the people who argued for Reaganism and fusionism.
And these guys are radically different than the Buckleys and the Reagans.
Yeah. Yeah, they're radically different. I think one of the things that surprised me as I was writing, because to write this book, I had been really keeping my eye on the present people, but then I sort of had to learn all this stuff about the conservative history that I had never been that interested in before. So, it became pretty clear pretty quickly that the paleo-conservatives or that the fringe that we're now seeing, I mean, basically one way to describe what's happening is that the fringe of the GOP has become the rug, right? Like the fringe has taken over the party, but they've always been there and they've been pretty powerful and they've constantly been sort of chomping at the bit to push things in this direction. And so you can go back, I go back a little bit in the book to Goldwater and what his movement represented at the time. Again, it kind of failed catastrophically. And then Reagan got a lot of that energy, right? And he used it and he changed a little bit. And then, but people still took issue with Reagan from the fringes. They thought this guy is way too internationally motivated. He doesn't understand what it is to be a real American, like just too international and too open to all kinds of liberalism. So they took issue with a lot of things about Reagan, and then they took issue with the neoconservatives as well. And one of the names for this sort of this other thread of the movement is the paleoconservative fringe, or the paleoconservative faction, I guess. And they're very powerful in the current movement. And they're very, and when I talk about people like Michael Anton, who wrote that first essay, he was clearly very explicitly inspired by Pat Buchanan, Sam Francis, some of these people who I would associate with paleoconservatism. And they were able to see, oh, Trump is that. Trump is doing all the things that the paleoconservatives wanted to do, and including there's white supremacy sort of mixed in with a lot of the paleo stuff. So it's a really messy thing. But anyway, I can go through sort of systematically, if you want, what the differences are between the Reagan version and this new version, if that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'd be curious to hear.
So if people are over the age of like 25, let's say, then they probably are familiar with the term fusionism, or at least with sort of Ronald Reagan, and this idea that there was kind of a Reagan-esque establishment that was sort of neoconservative eventually, but sort of the Reagan establishment. So Reagan stood for something called fusionism. This is where when thinkers were trying to describe what exactly Reagan stood for, they talked about the three-legged stool of Reagan. Okay, they called it the Gipper stool, and that was liberal economics, right? So, and which we would also like classical liberal economics, free trade, fiscal conservatism, and sort of small government economics. That's the
deregulation.
Deregulation, exactly. So that's the first leg of the stool. Second leg is social conservatism, right? So fusionism was able to basically meld liberal economics with social conservatism. And then the third leg is anti-communism abroad, or kind of liberal internationalism that Reagan is known for, right? So you have these three things, and that's basically a settlement between these different factions in conservatism that lasted for quite a long time, and until at least the end of the Cold War. And then these sort of fissures started to come out, and it started to get a little messy. We had 9/11, the wars in the Middle East, financial crisis, lots of different things, right? And Obama, which the right saw as catastrophic. And so the current administration, or what I call the MAGA New Right, in its theoretical presuppositions, it basically very explicitly rejected that old fusionism, and it stands now for, and this is Michael Anton in that, as early as 2016, saying Trumpism can be defined as economic nationalism, secure borders, and America first foreign policy. And I think that so that's quite different, right? It's different both on the economics and on the international plane, foreign policy, and it still maintains the social conservatism. So you got this sort of new stool that's very sort of almost isolationist in its outlook towards the world, right? And certainly nativist in its approach to basically what the nation is and how to understand, well, obviously immigration. And then you have this new economic policy that's sort of America first, tariffs, totally different vision for the economy, wedded to the old social conservatism, which is even more extreme than the prior versions. I mean, there's kind of an extreme social conservatism backlash against even Reagan's social conservatism.
Well, and also, this like really intense, like Christian
nationalism
vision for how the country is supposed to be run and how people's lives are supposed to be governed.
Yeah.
And there's a moment that you describe in the book where you really start to become disillusioned. I think this was when you were in your 5th year of grad school, and you were at, I think you were at some sort of summer program at the University of Virginia. Mm-hmm. I'd love to hear you tell that story, because that, I think, encapsulates maybe something about the dark heart of this movement.
Sure. I mean, that was back in 2010, and I was at one of these summer programs with a different institution, and sort of one of these places where you can go and they feed you really well, and they put you up in this fancy place, and they teach you about the American founding or something having to do with American history. But it's conservative, and so it's usually kind of lopsided. But you meet a lot of cool people. I mean, these things aren't all bad. And anyway, I was sitting there at the first dinner, and there was a staff member sitting right next to me who I had sort of heard about, and you know, he was high up. He was sort of responsible for this whole thing, right? It wasn't just some guy. And we sat down at the first dinner, and he said he was talking about how he had recently met Michelle Obama, who was first lady at the time. And then he just immediately said, he went on to say, she was so statuesque, just tall and gorgeous. And then he said, I really would like to fuck her. I would really like to fuck her. And I mean, it was sort of one of these things where I just thought, oh my God, are you kidding me? You asshole. Like, so I kind of got up and left because I just thought, I don't want to sit here next to this guy right now. And it was this very lucid moment for me where I just thought, what am I doing here? Who are these people? And I mean, that was it was partly a disillusion that it wasn't the only time I had felt something like this, right? Especially, you know, over the years I spent in conservative academic circles, but it really hit home in a different way. And I always remembered it. And so sort of one of the things I write about in the book is the misogyny of the new movement, of the current movement. And there is a kind of, that's far more pervasive than I would have expected even when I started writing the book in 2022. There's a kind of, it's not just casual misogyny, right? It's like a kind of intellectualized misogyny that is pervasive and explicit in some parts of the movement and a little subtler in others. But the book doesn't include any key figures who are women. And I did try. I thought, well, who's important enough and who has stature enough within the movement to include as an important, you know, female voice. And there wasn't really anybody who I thought had that stature. So, I mean, that moment in Charlottesville was interesting because it was partly just something that like asshole academics who study philosophy do, right? They're just like, how cool is she cool enough to sit here and be cool with us? Like it was kind of that kind of test too. But I wasn't 19, you know, I was older, and I just thought, I don't need this. Like, this is stupid.
Well, I mean, I think that it seems pretty obvious that white supremacy, misogyny, some form of Christian nationalism, these are the hallmarks of MAGA, right? Like, I mean, I don't know how you could possibly view it otherwise. So they seems pretty out in the open that these things are like central to the movement. And, you know, you've mentioned you've mentioned a few different things. You mentioned the pandemic early. You mentioned the financial crisis of 2008. The pandemic also had its own financial crisis that was, you know, baked into the cake. And then you talk about Obama, and then you mentioned 9/11. Like when I think in a macro way about the 21st century and the situation that we're in now in the United States, and I try to make sense of it, there have been all of these crises, all of this like acute financial difficulty, this kind of painful economic suffering. And then you tie that to these big social changes, like a man of color becoming the president of the United States. He's got this name that seems like ethnic and strange to a lot of Americans or something. And then you've got all of the like gay marriage becoming legal. Yeah. I think maybe people of the left might have underestimated, myself included, might have underestimated just how spooked and infuriated the right was by the rise of Barack Obama and the passage of, you know, the legalization of gay marriage by the Supreme Court.
It's very difficult to untangle kind of the different threads. I think that's exactly right. They underestimated how spooked people were by things that most of us, or many of us, liberals are delighted by, right? And so I want to be clear with just because I think it's kind of complicated what I'm doing in the book. And I agree with you that it's kind of white nationalism, misogyny. These are crucial ingredients of MAGA. But the people I write about, one of the things, and I'll come back to your point just now, but one of the things I'm trying to do with the book is show how I want to explain it. I want to explain the key moments, profile the people involved, right? And explain their ideas. But I'm trying to describe how alluring it can be and how a person could get caught up in some of this stuff. But it's also a very critical book that I hope has some sense of urgency, because I think that a lot of this stuff is a lot more extreme than just ordinary Americans are. So that all the things you just listed, right? That all these crises, the social change, the economic crises, the just sort of modernity going at this galloping pace. I think those affect all of us. I think a lot of us can understand how you could be disillusioned with politics in response, right? And how I think that's one thing I've gained over the last 4 or 5 years is like a real understanding of how people could be so disenchanted and so disillusioned by the political system. So I feel like over the course of this time, I sort of understand Trump voters better, not just because I've written about all these intellectuals, but just living through this period, right? And my own frustration with the Democrats. So in my book, there's something going on here where I'm trying to show, first of all, there's a lot of different sort of tiers of these people who are making these arguments and who are defending Trump. And I would not feel comfortable saying that they're all white supremacists at all, right? Some of them really are explicitly, but other ones are just kind of playing footsie with it, and others are completely deny it. And so what they end up doing is having these sort of abstract philosophies. There's a Harvard professor, there's Patrick Deneen, who I mentioned before, where in his most recent book, he attacks racism, right? I don't think it's a very thoughtful attack. I don't think it's very rich, but it is certainly, I think, sincere. But they're still, it's not like they've never repudiated Trump. And J.D. Vance is very close with some of these people. So they're all kind of in the swirl of this new movement. There's different levels of racism. There's different levels of explicitness, which is all just to say that part of what's happening here too, which I try to show in the book, is that there's some really sophisticated thinking that can be if you have a certain kind of intellectual inclination, it can be really attractive. And then there's also all this cultural stuff, right, with the manosphere and this sort of revival of the ancient aesthetics and all of this crazy stuff. But I mean, partly when I started seeing that stuff, I was like, oh, these guys are talking my language, because I love that ancient stuff, right? I love the classics. I love the Greeks. And this stuff is pretty twisted, a lot of it. But there's something there that I think is surprising, right? And it does help us understand what's going on by not just going for and I do not in any way want to apologize for it or I don't want to be an apologist for the racism and the nastiness of it, but I think to understand it, we have to see that there's other things going on here too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's confused me about conservatism since I was young, is the fact that you can be somebody who is not overtly or virulently racist, and yet you can be an avowed member of a political movement that permits that sort of stuff under its tent. It's like, oh, well, I guess Trump can say these things about shithole countries, and he can demean and he can retweet really explicitly white nationalist and racist memes, but that's just Trump being Trump, and that's not me, but I'll vote for him. And there's the word is incoherence. There's so much incoherence to my eye. And I think this deniability that that a lot of them engage in, or that I think the top tier, the people, they just make fun of anybody who calls attention to those problems with Trump. And they act like they don't have anything to do with it, but they really have hooked their wagon to this guy in an important way. So yeah, I agree it's incoherent, but it still is happening, right? It's crazy. Yeah, it's crazy. And let's talk a little bit about Trump, because he is in many ways kind of the perfect vessel for the right in its incoherence, because he's so malleable. Yeah. He doesn't stand for anything but himself. He really just cares about advancing his own interests, winning, and kind of running his administration like a rolling reality show. And popularity. Yeah, he cares a lot about the popularity. It was interesting to see him sort of gushing over Zoran. I don't know. I was a little uncomfortable with everybody kind of memeing that, because I feel like the other shoe's going to drop and it's a little overboard. But I was thinking to myself, he just loves a winner. I think so too. This guy just likes anybody who wins. Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that all of that I think it's all very positive in a way. The Mamdani thing, I think, is just
maybe a little inexplicable, but except for that he does love a winner. But there's all these other upsets happening right on the right now, where the people I write about, it's fracturing very publicly at the Heritage Foundation, which is the biggest right-wing think tank, is kind of imploding because the president has not taken a stance against Tucker Carlson's interview with Nick Fuentes. So there's all this stuff kind of bubbling up, and it's showing to be very unstable. I'm still a little skeptical that it's just going to fully implode, and partly, but I'm still hopeful in a way. But what we're seeing, I think, is interesting. But then the MAGA New Right that the book is about, they still have a lot going for them, and they have sort of taken over the movement. But I think it's important to say they don't really care about Trump at all, and so they're going to face some real problems. They're facing problems now that they're kind of in power because there's all this. Now they're starting to feel responsible for the actual policies that are being implemented. Like Project 2025 is sort of the brainchild of many of the people I write about. And then J.D. Vance is their guy. He's got I write about different factions of the New Right. So I've mentioned the Catholics and the Claremont Institute people. There's also a whole group called the National Conservatism Conference, and that organizes all these people together at different times. And then there's the sort of hard right fascist world that I also write about. So there's all these different parts of this movement, this intellectual movement. But J.D. Vance has had his sort of fingers in every little pot, right? He's been speaking at the Claremont Institute conferences, and he's been honored by the Claremont Institute. He speaks at the National Conservatism conferences and is honored by them. They're all delighted that when he got the nomination. And then he's also very close with people like Patrick Deneen. And I think Adrian Vermeule, and as we know, he's friends with Peter Thiel, who bankrolled a lot of his campaigns. So we have him. He's just like the poster child for all of this stuff. And he's the vice president. And he's the presumed, torchbearer for Trump. So I think that if nothing else, my book helps to explain his rise. And also it will be very interesting to see if he's able to maintain any of the momentum if Trump is out of the picture.
Yeah. I mean, that's an open question because Trump is sort of sui generis, like with this television personality background and this kind of odd charisma, and just like, it's so funny, just to think of like political philosophy and like serious intellectual engagement and having like serious intellectual underpinnings to this movement. And all of that stuff I think is legit. It's real. There are people out there doing this thinking and writing in earnest, and they believe their stuff. I might find it crazy, but they believe it. And then I think of Trump, and it's almost like trying to apply like a really serious philosophical rubric to like the behavior of a shark.
I know.
That's how I see him. He's just like in the water, just like wanting to eat.
Yeah.
And I don't
With
see him having
powerful instincts. Yeah.
Yes, but like no real like rich inner life or self-reflection or certainly no self-criticism that seems serious.
Well, I think that's right though. And I think that's exactly how, like you said at the beginning, he makes this perfect vehicle, right? And that no matter this was going to happen. They've been very successful and savvy. Like the nature abhors a vacuum, right? So they've come in and they've given him the arguments he needs. They also saw what he represented very clearly. They saw that he was able to navigate this world of the people who felt excluded, right? The people whose who were anxious about their sort of the demographic shifts, all of these paleoconservative drives or whatever that I mentioned earlier. Like they were able to see that. They sort of smelled that in the blood in the water, and they saw he is that. And then they sort of they gathered and they pooled their resources, and some of it was that, some of it was just this much sort of more archaic kind of conservatism reaching back even further. And then the Catholic groups, they're almost like medievalists. They're reaching back to like a French Revolutionary form of Catholicism or a pre-French Republic. Like there's it's just this wild stuff that they're drawing on to try to really, they call it post-liberalism or Catholic integralism in some versions of what they're anticipating. And it's just it's a real return, right, to an older sort of pre-modern form of life is I think their ideal in many instances. It's very wacky though.
Yeah.
But but I do think it's kind of this odd thing that would have happened to any president, but especially to Trump, because he didn't have his own intellectual sort of vehicle to ride in.
Yeah, but he had some, like you say, he was driven by powerful instincts. I think if I'm trying to be generous and to understand his success as a political actor, he clearly understood that like working class people with maybe more traditional or socially conservative views could be reached with like a strongman message. Mm-hmm. And this kind of anger and this kind of highlighting of the immigrants are coming over the border and they're going to steal your job and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then the other big thing is I think he's just such a creature of media, like New York media culture. Mm-hmm. And really, I think if there's anything he's really gifted at is that he's such an outstanding student of that whole world. The PR, the television of it all, and then also the social media of it all.
Yeah.
He was way ahead in terms of how like this new media environment that we live in, the speed of it, and the kind of like the way that you can just keep bulldozing forward, right, even if you have a bad media cycle.
Yeah.
Like nothing is ever fatal. Lie your way through it. Don't apologize. Like he kind of broke all those norms with impunity and made it evident that that kind of thing was possible before anybody really had a chance to recognize what he was doing, or he just blew through. Like I just think of like the 2016 primary.
Yeah, that was incredible. Wasn't it? No pushback.
No pushback. Just started like handing out nicknames, being ridiculous, and people ate it up.
I think that there's also just a kind of the anti-elite resentment that he was able to navigate really beautifully, right? Just that I think does sort of that's a true thing, right? I think in like white working class populations, but not just white people, right? Where there's just this kind of exhaustion at the professional classes and their mode of speech and their kind of cloying control of everything. I mean, that's certainly a thematic in the book, and I think Trump taps into that. And I also think there's this, we can talk, maybe we can talk a little bit more about the religious stuff, but there's also a great book called Unholy by a journalist named Sarah Posner, and she's able to show all these connections between Trump and the televangelist world, right? That there's in addition to just like the new media and everything, he's also got these deep ties to like Paula White and just people who were very, very powerful in Christian, on the Christian right. And I think that really, when I read her book, I was like, oh, something clicked here for me, like the televangelism of Trump and his ability to just talk like that.
Well, yeah, I was going to say the tele. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't care at all about religion.
I don't think so.
He's a
bit weird that way.
He's like, no, he's like amoral to the core. And that's what's so strange about this, is that he has become this kind of savior figure to the evangelical Christian right, because he advances, I guess, their aims, right? He tore down Roe v. Wade, and he appointed all of these like ultra Christian justices or whatever. But he, as a human being, is just, you couldn't draw a person who's more morally compromised than this guy.
No, and they've got sort of, I mean, there's this whole other thing happening in MAGA, which is the independent charismatic movement, which is kind of a new revivalism. And that's another important piece of what's happening on the right. But it's not what I'm writing about primarily, but they have phrases for him, where they call him like the new Cyrus, right? That because Cyrus was a non-Jew who protected the Israelites in antiquity, and there's a line, but they've got all these prophecies about Trump. There's a line, sometimes God appoints a wrecking ball. It goes on and on, right? But I think it's a mistake to see it as just transactional, because there's this whole segment of the population that really is quite inspired by, or really thinks that he is this sort of anointed one.
Because these are like Paula Whites of the world, he's in communication with them. And I bet you like he respects them for the fact that they're doing this hustle. They're probably making a fortune. And they're good on TV. Yeah. And I think that to Trump is like, that's the currency. That's the ultimate currency. They get ratings.
Well, and I think there's also just like there are crowds that they speak to. There's that feeling of popularity. You're going to have rallies. The people show up. They're giving him what he wants, right? Which is the energy. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk about another piece of this. I think alluded to it a little bit, but it's like the manosphere piece. And I guess it's tied to the misogyny, but it's all about like the crisis of masculinity that we keep hearing about, I think, in the media. And I don't think it's without reason. I think there really are deep problems with men and with their prospects in this country, young men in particular, and how this can be like a critical driver of political thinking and behavior.
Yeah.
But there is also, it's kind of like obnoxious obsession with masculinity. And, I'd just like to hear you talk about that part of the New Right and MAGA.
There are a bunch of different characters who I try to introduce in the book. People I've been aware of for maybe 4 or 5, well, since before I started the book, right? And some of them have PhDs in political philosophy, which is one of these weird things that was striking to me and kind of uncanny. Like in Straussian political philosophy, so pretty similar background to me. And a few of these guys, I guess I can name 2 in particular. There's one named Costin Alamariu, whose pen name is Bronze Age Pervert, and he graduated from Yale in, I think, 2014 or 2015 or something with a PhD, and he wrote on Leo Strauss and Plato and Nietzsche and Pindar. Like, he wrote this weird dissertation, but as he was finishing up a postdoc, my understanding, he was also writing this other book called Bronze Age Mindset, which became really sort of went viral. And he's got a podcast called Caribbean Rhythms, and he's got a Twitter account as Bronze Age Pervert, where he just photographs beautiful male bodies all around the world and a lot of racist stuff. And he's got this Epicurean kind of lifestyle where he's also eating amazing food and talking about symphonies. So he's got this like very weird persona, and he wrote and this Bronze Age Mindset book is extremely misogynist and racist and sort of violent in its rhetoric. But it's an imitation of Nietzsche, who wasn't exactly a feminist. And so it's kind of all of this stuff that's been sort of pent up in this guy, presumably. And it's really, I think it sold really well, and it became this sort of thing on the right.
Why?
Well, I mean, everything about it is hyperbolic, countercultural. It's breaking all of the taboos. There's kind of a fetishization of transgression, I think, that's happening in this book in particular, and with this guy, where he's just saying everything. He calls, as I mentioned, this anti-elitism before that permeates the New Right, and the sort of anti-professional class. It's sort of anti-liberalism. And they've got all these different words for it. Like, there's the liberalocracy, the professional managerial elite. The cathedral is something you'll hear probably in California more, which is the Curtis Yarvin phrase. So Bronze Age Pervert calls that the longhouse. And he's referring to basically these old supposed matriarchal cultures where people would all live together in a longhouse and be ruled by women. And his idea is that we're now governed by women. We live in a gynocracy. I mean, and so his target, I mean, if we're going to do this very quickly, you could say the New Right is largely animated by this loss of status, right? That there's all these people who have, over the last 50 years, there's been all this social change, and they feel that as a loss of white power, loss of status, economic anxiety maybe mixed in a bit with that, right? But you've got this, and someone like Bronze Age Pervert says, yes, and the ones to blame for that are the women, the professional women who have taken our jobs. So he's got, and anyway, the book is very strange. I mean, I could go on about it, but it's very weird. It's also very funny. The guy is it's not my sense of humor, but you can't deny that some of it's smart and funny. And so you have things like that. There's another character named Michael Millerman, whose PhD is from the University of Toronto. And he had a much harder time getting his degree because his supervisors recognized what he was up to several people quit from his committee. But what he was up to was translating the works of Alexander Dugin, who is sort of, some people call him Putin's court philosopher, which is, I think, a gross exaggeration. But it is this guy in Russia who's got this like super medieval kind of just like fascist, pro-nationalist outlook for Russia, right? And Michael Millerman is translating and popularizing these books as he's writing a dissertation about Dugin. So, and then they give him a PhD at the University of Toronto. And now he's online. He's, very well connected with Dugin, it seems. And he also, I think this is what's interesting, he offers, he's founded something called the Millerman School, where he teaches young men about great books, and he offers courses online. And that's not uncommon. So you've got this kind of weird melange of like high and low philosophy, of like gutter fascism and racism and misogyny blended up with all these high ideals. And I think there's something, I don't think that's intoxicating on its own, but you can certainly see that there's a yearning for this stuff in our culture, and that young men are drawn to it. And I can understand being drawn to some of this, because I was too, as a young person, to a much more wholesome and like decent version of it. But you see this with like Jordan Peterson, I think, is the best example, where you have somebody who is a real crank, but is able to write a few books that seem to give young men somewhere to plant their feet, right? Something to believe in, some rules for life. And apparently they're not getting it elsewhere, because there's, the guy sells millions of books. And so there's sort of, I mean, I think on a theoretical plane, I could talk a lot about this, because I think what they're doing is they're exploiting a vulnerability of liberal democracy, right? On just the most basic level, liberal democracy is sort of the modern constitutional order we live in the West. And one of its foundational claims is that it's not going to tell you how to live your life, right? It's not going to hand you, our government doesn't hand us a full-fledged articulation of when you should go to church, how many children you should have, what morals you should hold, right? It says that's up to you. You're a free individual. And that comes with some dangers for a culture and for a society. And I think these guys are exploiting that. And they're saying, we have the answers for you. Here you go. And come with us.
Yeah, I've read something about this. I've read multiple somethings, but it's like this hunger in young men. I think I've heard it characterized as like they want like a cyber dad. They want like a dad on the internet who's going to kind of tell them what to do, like you said. And some of them would gravitate to a guy like Jordan Peterson. Others will gravitate to like Scott Galloway. He's like a very like popular podcaster, and kind of talks about like how to invest your money. And you know who he is? Like, no, but that sounds plausible. He's with like he and Kara Swisher do a podcast together.
Oh yeah.
So, and I think I think he's more benign and less cranky than Jordan Peterson is my read on it. But same sort of deal in terms of the function that they are performing for young men. And I guess it's like wondering how to fix it. Like what? Mm-hmm. Like young men are clearly, or at least a lot of young men are clearly at loose ends and feeling directionless, and maybe like the kinds of opportunities they want to have aren't there for them. Seems like a tinderbox. It seems dangerous, and it seems like we're seeing the evidence of the danger and where we are right now, right? They've kind of invested themselves in this movement, which is like openly illiberal, anti-democratic, amoral. I mean, it's a lot of different things, but those are pieces of it. And I don't know. It's like, how do we bring young men back towards sanity is my question, I guess.
Well, I mean, I think one important thing, and one of the reasons I wrote the book, I wanted to show that it was alluring, but I also think I think that we are at real risk of overstating how many young people are invested in this. A lot of it's performative. A lot of it's not real, right? Like I talked about when I was younger, I was into all kinds of arguments, but I wasn't acting on anything. And I think that a lot of this stuff's really fascinating and exciting. But I think in the book, like it's just in terms of basic politics, if we sort of set the young man problem aside, it's not I really wanted to show in the book these thinkers I write about, who I think do have a ton of power in the Republican Party right now and under Trump, that it's not that popular. And the most American voters are not radicalized like this, is my hunch. And I think there is polling data to support this. I really don't think that they're nearly as radical or as extreme as the people who have taken over the party. And that's important for understanding where young men are too, right? And I don't have any easy solutions for that. I think one important thing is just for liberals, I think a lot of this is a pretty liberal country in a lot of ways. It's also a very religious country. It's a very big, messy, country with messy history, and it's all kinds of regional complications. I think that one important thing to notice is that, we don't know how many young men they're not caught up permanently in this stuff. Things change very quickly. That's another thing we've learned over the last few years. And I think one thing that liberals have done is they've really taken a lot for granted for the last 50 years or more, right? Or that's my sense of it, that Democrats have taken a lot for granted. People keep being shocked and surprised that that their own values and ideals are not universally shared. And I think that they maybe haven't done enough to defend those things and to articulate them in ways that are not condescending, right? Or that are just such that they're able to talk about them. So I think one of the first things to do as parents or as people who, see young people is just to be willing to talk about it and to acknowledge these problems with our society, with our political system, with the fact that our political system is not meant to just hand us the rules for life, right? But that's something that means it's hard, right? It's really hard to live as a modern person in a liberal democracy because it means we have to make all kinds of decisions as free people for ourselves. And as parents, I think parents know this, but it's something maybe we could start at least by being more explicit about.
Well, and I think, if we're going to talk about the Democrat/liberal piece of this and the frustrations that I see in evidence all the time on social media, like you say, taking for granted support from working class people without actually addressing their serious and legitimate economic needs, for example, like years and years of that is part of what led us to this moment. And I feel like there's so much change. Like in my view of things, there's a lot of big shifts happening. I think Zohran Mamdani winning in New York is like maybe the most prominent evidence of what we might see in a few years, on the left. But it's clear that the kind of liberalism that Joe Biden represented just wasn't meeting the moment.
Yeah. No, sort of sleepy Joe liberalism is not gonna suffice, and neither is smug liberalism, right? So it has to be kind of direct, authentic. At the end of the book, I say quite a bit about higher education and some of what I think needs to happen in higher education, and part of it is just a kind of education that is not always so critical. The New Right has gone on all these rampages against critical race theory or the 1619 Project, and I think those attacks are really stupid in the main. But there's something in higher ed where I think a lot of the universities have lost their sense of mission, and they don't provide a place where young people can think about civics or about great literature or about, the problems of what it means to live a good life. And I was really fortunate to get to do that in college. And you can do it from a leftist perspective. You can do it in all kinds of different ways. It's just a kind of direct encounter with the big questions of life. And I think that university administrators don't even know what that's about, right? Many of them. There are some good people out there, obviously, and tons of this is happening on university campuses. It's just not. It's not very explicit, and they're not good at describing the mission of the university in those terms. And I think that's an important thing. I think that the liberals should seize the moment and the opportunity and see what's happening on the right and say, well, we do have a response to that for our young people.
Yeah, like more open debate.
More open debate and higher, right? And like one of the things that makes me crazy about the people I write about, especially these like Michael Millerman or Bronze Age pervert characters, is they're not telling the truth about this literature. Maybe they are, but it's not very good. Like it's not very good philosophizing. It's not very good. They're not very good readers of Homer. And it's frustrating for someone who cares about that stuff, who cares about the European tradition and comparative literature. There's all these wonderful resources in history that can inspire young people in a real way. And I would hate to see that left to these bozos on the right.
Well, there's so much in this book. It's a really in-depth exploration of all of these various forces at work and the people who are guiding whatever philosophy guides the New Right and the MAGA movement. It's it's all over the place. And like you say, incoherence is like a feature and not a bug. We obviously can't cover everything that's in it. People will have to read it, but I don't want to part ways with you without asking what you think about the near future. Like, what do you see coming? Do you have a clear view?
No, I can't say I do. Everything is so surprising all the time. I am I'm happy to see some of the pressure that's being put on some of these people. I think that they are feeling the instability of their movement, and they're feeling the public pressure. Like when Nick Fuentes goes on Tucker Carlson, a lot of Americans don't like that. And when Kevin Roberts at the Heritage Foundation is sort of cozying up to Carlson, the donors don't like it.
Okay, so wait. I just want to because some people might be listening and they're like,
they don't know.
Yeah, like Nick Fuentes is...
Nick Fuentes is the head of what is called the Groyper Army, and he's a horrible anti-Semite and sort of just like, and racist and misogynist. Like he's sort of this really gutter character, but he's got millions of followers of presumably young people. And he went, and most people will not host him. Like most people with kind of a decent audience, or who wants to maintain some kind of boundary between what's sort of decent and not, will not host Nick Fuentes. Donald Trump did a few years ago at Mar-a-Lago, but Tucker Carlson had him on his show earlier this year, and that created a huge, huge controversy because the president of the Heritage Foundation basically went on Twitter and said, I support Tucker Carlson, gave him this like pledge of allegiance to Carlson. Anyways, this whole big thing. And then the donors at the Heritage Foundation were really angry about that. So, I mean, I think it's all too little too late, but Kevin Roberts did issue some weird apology, but it sort of just shows there's all this upset. People are not unified. They are in some ways. And I've been sort of disgusted with how long this thing has lasted and how unified they have been. But right now it's all very dicey, and then the Epstein stuff just adds a far more important layer, because who knows? I don't think Trump's going to get through that very easily. I think it's going to continue to fracture the party. But they might dig in their heels and just do worse and worse stuff to try to solidify their power. I'm still glad it's happening, but I don't know what will happen as a result.
They always double down.
Mm-hmm.
Like Trump and that's his modus operandi. Never apologize, always fight back.
But then when his popularity tanks as a result, he does seem to respond in some ways to the popularity.
But if he's, I don't have any confidence that they're going to really release these files with Trump's name all over them.
That's true.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I cannot imagine that would be political suicide for him to be, because he's in there, and I feel like.
But I think that's just the thing. It's going to stay in the news, and people know, because it's impossible. It's undeniable. I mean, it seems undeniable. People just kind of know what's at issue here.
So 2028, it'll probably be J.D. Vance. Hopefully, we'll have like a free and fair election, or some facsimile of a free and fair election. I have been like watching the social media of it all in the aftermath of the Charlie Kirk shooting, like wondering, are we going to see like a J.D. Vance, Erica Kirk ticket? Like that seems like where things are headed, but I could be totally wrong. Like, is that?
Yeah, I don't think so, but I don't know. I just don't think so. I actually wouldn't bet on J.D. Vance making it through to the 2028. Again, I'm always wrong, but I wouldn't. I just don't think he's got what it takes. And I think this thing's, I hate to say this, I shouldn't predict anything, but I just, and that could just be my own personal distaste for J.D. Vance, combined with my optimistic personality,
But you think somebody else would get the nomination, is what you're saying?
I sort of think so. I think I think Trump's going to be magnificently unpopular. J.D. Vance is already not very popular or very likable to a lot of people. And so I don't know. I don't think I just don't think it's looking very good for him. But I really don't know. I mean, this is not my forte. I was surprised. I was watching this closer than anyone, and I still kept being surprised by how much power they got, and the fact that J.D. Vance was nominated, everything. And Elon Musk, I was shocked by that. So. Yeah,
I've been wrong so much over the past. Like, I've been humbled in that way. Like, I'm done being a prognosticator, and I keep like I was somebody who, like, in 2006 was like, well, this is the worst it's ever going to be. Like this, the Iraq War and the weapons of mass destruction. I was like, this is it. We've hit bottom, and I was totally wrong then. I was wrong in 2016, 2017. Like. I'm just done. I'm just kind of observing and trying to learn at this point, and hoping that we can find a saner path. And your book helped to illuminate what's going on, and it's a valuable contribution to the discourse. So I congratulate you on it, and I thank you very much for taking time to talk with me.
Thank you for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Okay, there we have it. That was Laura K. Field talking with me about her book. It's called Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right, out there now from Princeton University Press. It's enlightening. Check it out. You can find Laura on the internet at lkfield.com. Follow her on Blue Sky and Twitter. Once again, the book is called Furious Minds, and it'll help you wrap your head around what's happening, what happened, what might happen, all of it. And she's an astute observer of the political right. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. You can also subscribe on YouTube, and you can follow me on Blue Sky and Instagram. Sign up for my newsletter at bradlisti.substack.com. Support this show over at patreon.com/otherpplpod, especially if you listen all the time. If you listen regularly, support the show. Throw a few bucks in the hat over at patreon.com/otherpplpod. If you want to join my book club, the Other People Book Club, or if you want to get an Other People t-shirt or a sweatshirt, you can do all of that stuff at otherppl.com. And don't forget about Deep Dive. Cyber Monday sale ends tonight at midnight, December 2nd, 2025. Save 50% on all courses and bundles. Just use the offer code CYBER2025 at checkout. If you want to send it as a gift, just select Send as a Gift at checkout, and you can pick the day and time of delivery to a person's inbox. It's that simple. The website is www.deepdive.audio. All right, last but not least, if you have a moment and you don't mind doing it, I would appreciate it if you would rate and review this show wherever you listen. If you want to read my book, it's out there, my latest book. All of my books are out there, but my latest book is called Be Brief and Tell Them Everything. I haven't plugged it in a long time, but for some reason I am. I guess it's the holiday season. If you want to buy somebody a book that is about like being a parent of a disabled child, it's like sad dad autofiction. It's great. There's a big mushroom trip at the end. It's also kind of funny, you know. It's like basically me. If that sounds good, you can get it and read it, or give it to somebody. It's a stocking stuffer. And coming up on Thursday, I should be back with a brand new episode of Brad and Mira for the Culture, assuming my friend and co-host Mira Gonzalez isn't like somehow unavailable. Maybe she went too hard at Thanksgiving and she'll be sick. I don't know what's going to happen, but you just sort of cross your fingers and you hope. It's the season of hope. If everything goes all right, we should be back on Thursday. Brad and Mira for the Culture, a pop culture assessment and irreverent, light show about bullshit. If you need a break from serious things, this is what this is for. It's also, I think, for people who are maximally parasocial. If you have a very strong parasocial relationship with me, the Brad and Mira show is looser and more personal. So there's that. All right? That should happen on Thursday. Fingers crossed. We'll see. I hope you had a good holiday. And, there's more holidays coming. So we just got to hang on. We got to bear down. It's happening. There's no avoiding it. I'll talk to you soon. All right? Okay.